Hello and welcome to Really Cool People, a podcast produced by Schweitzer Church. I'm your host, Jason Leininger. This is a place to hear stories of really cool people. The hope is that as we hear these stories, you and I will be inspired, encouraged, and challenged through moments of serendipity. In a sermon entitled The Weight of Glory, C.S. Lewis said, "There are no ordinary people. You and I have never talked to a mere mortal." It's my joy over the next few minutes to introduce you to somebody who may seem, on the one hand, rather ordinary, but when you take a good look, they are a really cool person. Today, we're going to meet Shay Bassett. I met Shay about a decade ago. I was working at Schweitzer, thinking about how could we engage those who were struggling with issues of poverty. And we came across a program called Jobs for Life. Shay was a trainer with Jobs for Life, and she helped us get on board and begin to introduce that program and that transformation to people here at Schweitzer. Along the way, I've had a number of occasions to be with Shay, to meet her. She's come to Springfield a couple times to train and to share some of the things she knows. She is a person who carries a lot of light, energy, passion, and fun. And then when she shares her story today, as you'll hear, there's some places that have been really challenging in her life. She's going to share some about abuse that she encountered and what that abuse did and how it chained itself out at different places along in her life. So if you've got small kids, you may not want to have them in the room when you listen to this story. But Shay's story is one of God's presence, of God's transformation, and of finding a place of light, of warmth, of confident hope. So I encourage you, wherever you're at, lean in, hear Shay's story, hear her heart, and hear what God would have for you this day. Today, we're glad to welcome to the Really Cool People podcast, Shay Bassett. Shay, welcome.
Thank you. Thank you for having me.
Oh, it's so good to have you. Why don't you just tell us a little bit about your self in terms of who you work for and how we met, and then we'll jump into your story.
Okay, great. So currently, I work for the Chalmers Center of Economic Development that is located in Lookout Mountain, Georgia. A lot of people know the Chalmers name because of the book, When Helping Hurts, How to Alleviate Poverty Without Hurting Yourself or the Poor. And I am just blessed to be able to serve in the role as the Director of Work Life, which is a biblical curriculum that focuses on soft skills for work readiness and making sure that individuals understand that we all, because we are image bearers of God, that we have gifts and talents that our community needs, our churches need, our businesses need. We're just needed because we're valuable people. Oh my goodness. So my story begins like this. A girl born into a family trapped in generational poverty. The youngest of 10 children. The interesting thing about being the youngest of 10 children, when I tell people that I'm the youngest of 10 children, one of the questions that's normally asked, which is just interesting to me, but I get it. And all of you have the same dad? Yeah, we all have the same dad, all that baby mama drama stuff, And so people, I think their idea or their thought process with an individual trapped in generational poverty, born in that type of family, typically there are multiple dads in the family when you have that many children. But I was blessed, of course, to have a mom and a dad, and had a dad that I saw get up every day and go to work. But the sad part is, and it's funny how God sets your life up. At that time, I did not realize that there was a thing called underemployed. That's what my dad was. Although he went to work every day, he was underemployed. And so when you hear that term being underemployed, you're working, but you're the working poor. You're working, but you don't make enough money to make ends meet. And so we lived in public housing. And at the age of 6 years old, my oldest brother was in the military and he got killed. And many years later, I began to think about that whole incident. And I said, oh my goodness, my brother's death caused us to be able to move out of public housing. And when I had that aha moment, I was like, wow, a death of a family member transitioned us out of public housing into what people would consider the American dream home. And in my lifetime, up until the age of 14, I experienced a lot of sexual abuse. And it started at the age of 5. It started when we lived in the public housing development. And so, Jason, up until the age of 14, just about every day I was sexually abused. And as I think back over my life, so many things I can't even remember. And I think it is because of the depths of trauma that I experienced as a child on up until the age of 14. I think God has shielded me from being able to even remember some of the horrific things. Now, of course, when I was going through it, I remembered. But years later, as the years started, I can't, like the question that you have, like, what was your life like as a fourth grader? Jason, I couldn't even tell you because I don't remember. Those years are totally blocked out for me. Totally blocked out for me. And so as I am going through life and I am seeing how God really is a God of economy, because everything that we go through, although it is horrific, although it's trauma, it is so that somewhere in your life, God will begin to use that for his glory. And the trauma and the abuse, the neglect from my mother, because I didn't have a mother-daughter relationship with my mom. I'm the youngest of 10 kids from 1953, 51 to 1968. She was pregnant. So when she got to me, I get it. At 40 years of age, I finally got it. She was sick of having babies. She probably wanted to pop my dad upside the head and say, listen, don't look at me. Don't touch me. Because every time you do, I get pregnant and I'm sick of having babies. And so we did not have the mother-daughter relationship, you know. And so what I did, I created an imaginary mother-daughter relationship in my mind. And I lived there up until the age of 40. And for whatever reason, God allowed that pivotal moment to happen on my 40th birthday. I met with a group of girlfriends and I began to tell them what had happened. I said, oh my goodness, I have come to realize that up until now, I had been dealing with the spirit of abandonment because creating that imaginary relationship with my mom, I was I created that because of the abandonment. Although we lived in the same home, I felt abandoned because she was not that nurturer for me. And so having to deal with that and coming to grips with that at the age of 40, this is what I realized. When I was at a place that I was willing to share, sitting around a table of probably 8 other women, guess what I found out? They experienced the same thing.
All of you around that table had similar experiences of both abandonment and abuse.
Yes. And I'm talking women from all walks of life. I'm talking professors of colleges, CEOs of companies, attorneys, doctors. We're all sitting around the table. And because at 40 years of age, on my 40th birthday, I had to talk about it. And the moment I talked about it, that's when I realized that all of these women that I admired, that I looked up to, had the exact, well, not the exact same experience, but a similar experience.
Lord have mercy.
Yes, yes. And so, fast forward now, I am an adult, mom of 2 kids, grown now. We're going to fast forward to my Jobs for Life era. That's where I met you.
Yeah.
I met you. I was traveling around the world training people on the biblical curriculum called Jobs for Life. And it's so interesting as I continue to think back on the years that God was preparing me to travel around the world to talk about poverty. And I had a different perspective on the effects of poverty and trauma that most people that I was in that space with, they did not have that experience. And so as I began to share the simple things that when you are in poverty, I will say for me, one of the best things you could ever do for me is to know me by name.
Hmm.
And the reason why I say that is because as I worked in this space and as I'm cultivating my relationship with God, I came to realize that names are so important to God. And people in this space oftentimes refer to the group of people that they're serving. Either they're our clients, they're our residents, they're our neighbors. But do you know them by name? And as I began to talk with people, I said, the Bible doesn't say your circumstance is going to be written in the Lamb's Book of Life. It says your name will be written in the Lamb's Book of Life. And when you are so intentional about knowing someone's name and learning it, they become human to you. They are not a project. They are not a client. They are not another case note or a person that you're just trying to get through the door. No, this is an individual who was created in the image of God, that God loves so much that he knows us by name. And because it's important to him, I need you to know my name. Does that make sense?
It does. It's a profound gift to know that someone knows your name.
Yes.
That's incredible that one of the things that you would share about, like, in engaging other folks is to learn people's names and to move beyond just all of the other kinds of terminology, to come back and to see someone as somebody who's created for purpose and meaning and joy and created in the image of God. So thanks for sharing
Yeah,
that
absolutely.
important reality, that important teaching.
When you go out to restaurants or when you are renting a car or when you're doing anything personally like that, or you're at the airport and you're dealing with somebody at the front desk, call them by name and see, don't it make a difference?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
It's going to make a huge difference, I promise you. Or when you are, even on Sundays, I'm sure, because you're that type of pastor, you know people by name. And it's great to be able to say, hey, Shay, as opposed to, excuse me, ma'am. It's a lot of ma'ams in here. You know what I mean?
That's right.
So try it. You already know that anyway. But, I just think that as we are living in this world, because we all are different, but all created in the image of God, there is a level of connection that I have with you regardless. And I tell people often that I need to have every person from each ethnic group in my life. Why? Because when I don't have them in my life, I am missing a part of God.
Hmm.
I'm missing a part of God.
Yeah.
And why? Because we are all created in this image. So if I'm a part of him and you are a part of him and I don't have you in my life, I'm missing a piece of God. And I crave for that and I long for that. And so when I'm in spaces that people, a lot of times, sometimes people have an idea or a notion that, because of the color of my skin, I'm not going in there. I don't care where I am. You are going to know that I was there
Hmm.
because of the craving that I have to know all of God. And I can't know or experience all of God if I don't experience all of his people.
Mm-hmm.
I hope that makes sense. I don't know if that resonates with anybody but in your audience, but for me, that is so crucial for me to have that in my life. And that's why when I go into spaces, Jason, I can go in being authentic and being who God created me to be so that I can experience the God in you.
Mm-hmm. When you think about the fullness of the story of your life, that full arc, like those early images of trauma and abuse, how do you have the sense of joy that you have today? Because one of the things, like when you walk into a space, Shay, you are colorful. There's nothing about you that isn't full of color, and your smile is big, your joy is big. You engage with much exuberance. How does that? How do you carry that sense of joy? And also with the story that you started off with of saying, like at the age of 5, this abuse and trauma begins and it doesn't relent until I'm 14. So like what's the turning point? How did you become the person you are today with such trauma there in the early part of your life?
Wow. I wished I could tell you that this part of my story was easy, but it's not. One day I decided I am going to have a boxing match with God. And I knew going in the ring, I was going to win.
How
And
did you imagine you were going to win?
listen, that was my warped thinking, brother. I just knew when I got into this boxing ring and had this boxing match with God that I was going to win. Isn't that crazy? But I thought it. I'm just telling you the truth. I thought it. And I wanted him to know that I could not believe that these particular women were trying to tell me about this loving God. And they wanted me to be convinced about this loving God who loves you and you're the apple of his eye. And they were laying it on thick. And I'm saying to myself, all of the people that have sexually abused me, all of this trauma, you're this loving God. How in the world could you allow this to happen to me? Like, my children being taken by the state of North Carolina. How could you allow all of this stuff to happen to me for someone who people are constantly trying to tell me that loves me with an unfailing love? You have got to be kidding me. So what is that about? And I mean, Jason, I am screaming to the top of my lungs. I am boo crying. I am just over the top. And all of a sudden, I feel like this warm blanket just wrap around me. And I can't tell you that I had ever experienced that before. but it was a feeling that made me feel loved, first of all, and safe. And I just experienced that and experienced like a very quiet voice tell me, I gave you your own will for a reason. I mean, I could tell you so much more about that story, Jason, but I will say this. At the end of the boxing match, I was on my knees with my hands lifted up in total surrenderance to God. And at that moment, the burden lifted. The bitterness, the pain, the unforgiveness, all of that lifted. And at that moment, I began to live and not just exist. Because at that, I was 33 years of age at that moment. And at 33 years of age, everything changed for me with the trauma and the abuse. And listen to this. Then 7 years later, at the age of 40, is when I came to grips with I was dealing with abandonment. And not only was I dealing with abandonment because I was the youngest of 10 kids, but my mom also passed away when I was 50. So I didn't even really get the opportunity to get it right, if you will, to really work on the mother-daughter relationship, to try to turn that fantasy into a reality. And so, yeah, that abandonment, man, that was something to deal with and to carry.
So on the one hand, it was an abandonment because your mom passed away early in your life. And at the same time, there were these years where you felt incredibly, and you were incredibly unsafe. It wasn't just a feeling of being unsafe, but you were in danger every day. And so in those spaces when you needed it, help wasn't there. So can you describe a little bit what that imaginary relationship, that mother-daughter relationship was like? What did that world look like?
Oh, wow. It was beautiful. Like, she was my best friend. We did things together. Because I love to read books, and I would think about, oh, wow, mom, I'm going to read this book. Let's read the book together. And then at the end of the book, let's talk about it, or if I am out with some friend girls and they're with their mom, it's like, oh yeah, my mom had something to do. She was alive at that time. She had something to do. She won't be able to make it with us, make it today. Always making those excuses because she wasn't there, you know. And just making sure that in my head that she was like the perfect mom. We had the perfect relationship. I could talk to her about anything. We would laugh and giggle. We would sit down and have tea. We would have, our little tea party together where she would tell me a secret and I would tell her a secret. And, it was really this imaginary world. But what happens when that imaginary world crumbles?
Yeah, what did happen?
At the age of 40, I'm sitting around a table of women and I began to share. And I got such a release because I began to cry. And it was so interesting because on one side, they were tears of pain and suffering, but on the other side, It was tears of joy because now I understand why I've been feeling this way all this time. And no one had ever sat me down, or no one had ever, said, well, maybe she needs counseling. Oh my goodness. Had I gotten counseling, yes, people, counseling is good for you. Had I gotten counseling, I probably wouldn't have been in some relationships, gone to some places, done some different things. And all of this stuff, believe it or not, it played out in every facet and every area of my life as it pertains to relationships. It was very hard for me to trust someone because my lived experience was, if I give something to you, I'm going to come back later and take something from you. So I was very leery of people giving me something because immediately I'm like, why are you giving this to me? What do you want? Like, what do you want from me? You're giving this to me. You must want something from me. And that was my lived experience. And so, man, it took a while for me to come out of that headspace because God did have trinkles of people, sprinkles of people that he allowed to enter into my life at different stages that showed me a different way. Although I bucked against it, I didn't want to hear it. Don't talk to me about it. I don't want to hear about it. This is the way that my life is, and this is the way it's going to be.
So can you imagine where there's like 2 or 3 clear examples where you said, or where you can point back to and say, because of this moment when I'm at 40 and this reality hits me, I've had the moment at 33, the moment at 40. Now there's some things that are clearly profoundly different in my life because of that breakthrough. Have you got 2 or 3 concrete examples?
Absolutely. One in particular is my former CEO. David.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. It's interesting because in my lifetime, having that experience of the state of North Carolina taking my children away, and all of the professionals that were a part of the state were either white males or white females. And the conspiracy was just unbelievable. It was unreal. That's another day that we'll talk about that. But David had no clue that God had used him in such a miraculous way when he hired me. You want more of the story?
Yeah. Unpack that. What was the miraculous thing that got happened when
the miraculous thing is that, one, as a result of the state of North Carolina taking my children away from me, it caused me to have a criminal history. And man, not to run down the rabbit trail, I'm going to stay focused on what I need to say. Having that criminal history, as you know, it's a barrier,
right,
for employment. Mm-hmm. It's a barrier. It's a huge barrier. Although it wasn't a felony, it was a misdemeanor, I still had criminal history. And David, we were having this conversation, and he came back and he said, Shay, I ran your criminal history, and you don't have to talk about it if you don't want to. I said, oh no, yes, I want to talk about it because I needed to start sharing my story. And as I shared my story with David, we had a moment. I'm not for sure, even to this day, I don't even think I've ever asked him, but it sounded like he was weeping as he heard my story. And at the end of the conversation, he said, I will call you tomorrow by 3 p.m. with my decision. The next day, exactly at 3 o'clock p.m., he called me and offered me the position. It was miraculous because he did not allow what he read on paper to dictate how he dealt with me. He had enough wisdom to want to hear my story. And as he listened to my story, I don't know all what the Holy Spirit was doing with him, in him, but all I know is that there was a moment that it sounded like he was weeping. And we had a moment on that phone. And to think about this unjust justice system with this scarlet red letter on my life now, which was a complete lie. But because I did not have the resources nor the community or that human capital, that social capital, that's what happened. And so for David to hire me was a miracle. But what, for me, because it set me on the trajectory of getting me out of economic poverty. And I remember I was 5 years in and we were having a staff meeting. And that particular day, I felt like I needed to share what he had done. And he had no clue that God had used him in that magnitude. And he said to me, he said, well, really what the truth is that you being in my life made me a better father. It made me a better leader, a ministry leader. It made me a better person. It made me a better businessman. Now, see, I didn't know that was happening to him. I didn't know the transformation was happening to him like it was happening with me. But that's the way God worked it out. That's the way he orchestrated it. Another time was, oh man, that's so many. As I am going through life, and God is just orchestrating, putting different people in my life. And it's interesting when you're going through a particular trial or test that you feel like, oh my goodness, you're going to die in it. But on the other side of that, of course, is victory. And then God will orchestrate you to be in the midst of people that you can share your testimony with that allows them to become free. So he gave me this opportunity to start speaking to women. And I wanted them to know that this woman that is speaking before them is a woman that God has taken her broken pieces and shattered dreams and truly have put her back together. And going into these spaces, I knew the common thread was trauma. And I had to share the rawness of my story. And as I'm sharing my story, I just could not believe the number of women that came up to me at the end and said, I too was sexually abused, and you are the first person I've ever told. And Jason, I'm telling you, these were women. I think the oldest woman in the room that came up to me, I think she was 80. She was around 80 or 82. And all I could do is when I left that place and I was on my way home was weep. And I thought about her in particular because for 80 years, she had to carry that. For 80 years, she had to carry the shame, the guilt, the bitterness, the rejection, for 80 years. And God, who gave me the courage to tell my story in a way that I was unashamed and unapologetic, allowed women to feel like they could come up to little old me, this insignificant being, and tell their deepest, darkest secret to. Yeah, that's a miracle. It's a miracle.
I think one of the fascinating things is as you unpack that, as you look at that, and as we've heard some of those stories of women who've sat at this desk, who've expressed that, is the kind of grit and tenacity and grace that people find that is available to them, that you are expressing and giving voice to, that somehow in the midst of all that trauma, all those things that are unrighteous and that are unright, God finds a way to show up and do his transforming work in a manifold array of ways that we can't even begin to fully name, even if we tried. And it's like, on the one hand, it looks like, where is God? On the other hand, it's like the fullness of God is around all of that story, and God is at work in the midst of it. I'm thrilled to hear your story, and you exude this sense of hope and confidence and joy that's just profound and deep and rich.
Thank you. That means a lot coming from you, sir. Thank you very much.
Well, those are, the story that you've told. We've met several times and we've talked several times, but this isn't something that I've heard from you in the past. And it's like that's one of the interesting lessons I've heard in doing this project, is that you can rub shoulders with people in lots of different places. And until you sit down and say, tell me about your life, you have no idea the layers that are there behind a person who may, like every time I see you, you are doing great. Like every time I see you, you're smiling. And it just is like, it's an amazing juxtaposition to imagine the person that you were carrying this deep, deep sorrow. And yet what God has done in your life is just, it's incredible.
I'm grateful. I am so grateful. But there was a point in my life, Jason, that because my dad, he only had a third grade education, and I got a couple of scholarships from different organizations to go to college, and going into my second year, his generation is you don't reveal your tax information to people because they're going to do something with it, and at the time I'm like, Dad, I need this to go back to school. Like, I need this to go to school. And because he really didn't see the value. I think he valued education, but did not really understand the value of education. And he would not allow me to let the college have his tax information so that I could get financial aid. And I chuckle at it now, but then it wasn't funny. It's like, oh, wow. Years later, it's like, okay, so your dad, he probably really didn't understand the value of education really because he only had a third grade education. And, man, your life would have been different. But hindsight is 2020. Like, I'm in rooms with people. I am the guest of Dr. Jason's podcast today. Like, God constantly put me in the room with doctors and attorneys and, just really high profile individuals. And I'm saying to myself, God, what in the world are you doing? Like, am I really supposed to be here? And then the answer is yes, you are supposed to be here. But there were times in my life that I felt less than.
Mm-hmm.
Because I said, here it is. I'm looking at all my other friends They have bachelor degrees, they have master degrees, some of them have PhDs, some of them have double masters. And here it is, you don't have a college degree. And so the enemy would play that tape, will allow me to play that tape over and over and over. Look at you. You in this room, but you're not like them. They have degrees and you don't. They're very articulate and you're not. Look at you. Now, what do you think? How are you thinking? Don't start thinking more of yourself than you should. And so being that person, and I'm sure there might be someone who, like me, born into a family trapped in generational poverty and somehow got out by the grace of God, had those moments of, well, who do you really think you are? You can't do that, you know? And I'm telling you, it is so real because often in my life, that's what I heard. You can't, you won't, you will never. Who do you think you are? You're nothing. You're not going to do that. You're not even smart enough to do that. And so a lot of that unaddressed trauma caused those tapes to start replaying in my mind as I am an adult, navigating and maneuvering through life, trying to find my way, trying to make my way. And then you hear people like you who say, Shay, when you walk in the room, you're so colorful, you're always joyous, you have all this joy in you, and you really have to think like, so that lie that I have bought into for so many years would have hijacked everything that God had in store for me had I continued to believe the lie. And I said all that to say that those of the individuals that are in your audience that will listen to this podcast that are serving individuals like the Shay Bassetts of the world who were born into family trapped in generational poverty, have dealt with abandonment, created imaginary relationships between her and her mom. One of the main things we can do for people is to continue to speak life, even if you yourself don't believe it. Just speak it. Speak it until you see it in them. Seriously, speak it. It's like, oh my God, this is the problem child. This is the baby kid. No, you don't see the baby kid. That person is an image bearer of Jesus Christ, and they have gifts and talents that probably no one has ever told them that they had, that they need to hear from you, that they are valued. You're valuable. We value you. Yeah. You're incredible. You can do this. You will do this. You must do this, and change the narrative from you can't, you won't, you will never, to yes, you will, you can, and you must.
Preach. That's all I'm going to say with that. Preach.
Because it's a game changer for us.
Yes, it is. Profound. Profound game changer.
Jason, I never heard my mother tell me once that she loved me.
Wow.
Never. Not once.
How many times do you tell your babies that you love them?
All the time. All the time. All the time. I want them to know.
Yeah.
All the time.
2 quick questions, and we'll wrap this up. You've given us a lot. I really appreciate this. One question is, what are you looking forward to? What is really life-giving to Shay right now in this moment in time? What's got you hooked? What's your passion right now? What are you pursuing?
That is a great question. Some days I feel like I'm all over the place, but one of the constants that I have, a desire that I have, and you're probably going to be like, okay, she is really crazy. But I am crazy enough to believe that we can live in this world together and love one another like Christ loved the church. That's what I'm passionate about. That's what I'm on fire about. That's what I could stay up all day and all night and talk about. God, send people in my life that feel the same way.
Mm-hmm.
Let's show the world that we are your disciples. Let's show the world that they know that we are your disciples because of the love that we have for one another. And the love is so strong that it just overcomes everything. It covers everything. And if you are feeling like you don't want to be involved with me for the color of my skin, but because of the love that's oozing out of me, it's so freaking contagious that you can't even stand it. And it's just like, okay, all right, I love you, Shay, dog. Okay, all right, I love you already. Yeah. I mean, that's what gives me hope every day. That's how I can walk in a room and you say you're colorful, that you have joy, that I'm happy, and that it's real joy. It's not fake. It's not an imitation. It is authentic and it is real.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it is. And it's not like I'm not the only one to notice that, but some of the folks that we were with at True Charity, like they just like, oh my goodness. The ones here from Springfield, they talked about that. They loved the fact that we could have a sit down meal together and have that conversation. And you're just so engaging, and life just does ooze out of you, and it's a gift to other people. So thanks for that.
Amen. Thank you for sharing that. Keep telling me that. Because some days, I need to hear that more days
Sure.
than not. But yeah, that's who I am.
Yeah. Then one final question, a question I like to ask all the guests on this podcast. What's a bit of wisdom that you could share with us that would, and you've shared with us lots of wisdom. So I don't know if there's, some other thing that's sitting out there that you're like, man, this is what I tell everybody, or this is what's on my heart today. But what's a bit of wisdom you can share with us for the future?
I would say whenever you come in contact with, or when God divinely connects you with someone like a Shay, you may be the person that God uses to show them vision, to give them vision. For so many years, I was a person of sight. I could only see what was around me in my immediate environment. When I looked out the door, that was what I saw. That's what I bought into. That's what I believed. I didn't believe that life could be any different until God, with his good self, orchestrated a few women along, my life, coming into my life, sharing vision with me, letting me know, no, Shay, life can be different for you. So anytime you get the opportunity to be the person to give another person vision and not just sight, do it.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Thanks for sharing your wisdom. Thanks for sharing your life with us.
You're welcome. My pleasure.
There's a lot more. There's plenty here for many more conversations. And
Yes.
that is the beautiful thing about just sitting and listening with someone, is that there's so much more, your loves, your passions, lots of other things. But thank you for sharing your beautiful life with us.
You are so welcome. Thank you for having me on your podcast.
You're welcome.
God bless you, Jason.
God bless you too, Shay.
Take care.
Hey, a big thank you to Shay for sharing her story today. In listening to Shay, I hope you were inspired, encouraged, and challenged, and that you will begin to behold the really cool people around you. Now, when listening to Shay's story, you may have some things happening internally with your own heart and mind. Maybe there were some things that she said that resonate with your story in ways in which your soul is troubled. We would always encourage you, if that's the case, if you need to talk to somebody, talk to somebody. If you need to speak to a counselor, do that. If there's some grief in some areas of your life that you need to talk to some professionals around grief, do that. Shay's story is difficult to behold, and yet it's beautiful what God has done with it. And it can be the same for you. Shay's story is going to be the finale of season 3 of Really Cool People, but we are looking forward to season 4, which will come out sometime in September. And one of the things we're looking forward to in season 4 is hosting a live and in-person Really Cool People. And we'll let you know about that when season 4 begins. The Really Cool People podcast is produced by Schweitzer Church, Springfield, Missouri. Taylor Likes is our executive producer and editor, and I'm your host, Jason Leininger. You can help us out by liking, reviewing, and sharing this podcast. Until next time, stay cool.